formally introduce myself. Everybody hear me pretty well? Rick, you got it? Good. My name's David Slay. I'm a ranger here. I also took a little bit of college part-time, especially as I was in the end of Civil War and African American history. I backed into that latter subject with my dissertation. It's on the United States colored troops recruited out of this region during the Civil War. In order to understand more about those brave men, I had to understand where they came from. Most of them were enslaved before the war, and the influences on slavery in this region, versus Spanish and French that are Anglo. And I had to understand a little bit about what happened to them after the war. Mississippi and national politics after the war, race relations all the way up to about World War I. It was quite a broad, expansive history. But tonight I want to talk to you about the settlement in the continent of Vicksburg. Why Vicksburg is here. Why people chose to settle on this particular site. We'll get into the combat. Tim told you a little bit about the geology. We'll get into later on about why they fought on this site. We're going to find out about why they chose to live on this site, what made this area special. Of course, we're going to start at the very beginning as far as it's relevant to us, with the first peoples who settled in or lived in this region. And as tour guides, you're going to get questions about that. Most of your people that come in and want to spend a few hours with you are going to be from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, and you're Mississippi's ambassador. I've seen a lot of movies, a lot of television about Mississippi. You get to show them real Mississippi. And they'll have questions. And even though it may not seem that the early peoples are relevant, they are very relevant to our discussion and what you'll be talking about on the tour. Indian mounds played prominent roles in some of the Civil War combat that took place in this region. Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, back down in the woods, is an Indian mound with a garage built on top of it. Goodrich Landing, remember the attacks there in 1863, during the early days of the SCT. Troops were fighting from the top of an Indian mound. It made good sense because everything else was flat, and they're in high water, which was quite frequent back then. There were no levees to speak of. Those Indian mounds served as pretty good defensive positions or observation positions. And of course, there's the story of the USS Koroa. No one aboard the Koroa died, but yet they still found human remains. Well, look, hey, that doesn't make sense. The femur was several hundred years old. Somewhere during those guys' journeys, they've gotten into an Indian mound. It was Victorians' fascination with the Indian mounds and picked up a souvenir and ended up aboard. Also, during that most recent round of battlefield clearing, cleared off the trees over in front of the Illinois Monument, they found evidence of a Native American settlement in that valley right there between Battery 1, the Golyer's Battery, and the Shirley House. It doesn't make sense, does it? Why would they camp in the middle of nowhere? Well, the original roads in Mississippi started out as paths for the Indians. Run the top of the ridges. It made good sense. It's hard to build roads in these swampy valleys. Tops of the ridges are not as dense. And one sure way to know you're on an old road in Mississippi is you're running the top of a ridge. It'll take you 10 miles to go 2 miles. I like traveling on old Baldwin's Ferry over across Clay Street sometimes. That road is lining of about 3 snakes. But you know you're on an old road because it's on the top of that ridge. Imagine back into early July 1863, a Confederate bringing that flag of truce up that road over to where the 2nd Texas then is, where they met with the Union forces for the first time when the flag was surrendered. So the old road is still here. Old geography, old geology, all impacts the present. You have an alleged Indian mound in the park, over in the cemetery. It was big there. They didn't find anything. The best we can determine is just a cutoff point from a hill. It has been dubbed the Indian Mound. You call it the Indian Mound, but you can put an asterisk beside it when you mention it. So we have that history. Native Americans did serve in the battle here with some of the Wisconsin and Minnesota units, Chippewas, Choctaws in this region, Cherokees out west. So we have the first peoples in this area that we talk about were the mound builders left behind these structures. And even the historic tribes over here during the first explorations didn't quite know a lot about it. They talked about them as the old people. And they stretched out across the southeast. And they had a lot of Indian mounds over in Georgia, Cahokia, further up north along the rivers, and scattered in backwoods and bayous around here. There's still mounds yet to be discovered. You'll have people who ask questions about that. Of course, you had historic tribes in this region, tribes that we know the names of, a little bit about. They have left their names on the maps of Mississippi. When I teach undergraduate classes on U.S. history, one of the things I do the first week of class is I give them a test. All the major tribes east of the Mississippi River. And I flunk them if they missed guessing where the Natchez tribe was located, where the Yazoo tribe was located. If I can't pick out the Natchez tribe on the map, it's a pretty good clue they didn't open their book at all. But they left their names in the places, the rivers throughout this region. But some prominent ones in this area were the Tunica. Yeah.
Wrong password.
Yeah. The Yazoo. Can't say the Yazoo. Pierre got on to me the other night and says, you say Yazoo, I know you're not around here. You got an emphasis on the zoo, like Jerry Clower did back in the day. Yazoo City, the Tunica, Koroa, and Ofo are in this region. And they're the ones the Europeans first encountered. How did I go backwards? Of course, the disease of the Europeans decimated the peoples in this area throughout the southeast. 1650, the population was around 2,000. By 1803, very few Tunicas remained. Because they did not have resistance to the diseases that were in Europe. And for some of the same reasons, slavery is going to take hold in this region. Among folks who supported slavery, they believed that this area was too hot, it was too hostile for white Europeans because living in the climates or coming from the climates of Northern Europe, they just weren't equipped for this, whereas peoples of equatorial Africa had developed resistance to some of those tropical diseases. And that was one of the rationales for creating slavery in this region, because they believed that white men just could not handle the climate. The European explorers and early settlements in this region for St. Pierre up at Haynes Bluff, Yazoo, about the Yazoo in 1729. Fort Rosalie, the massacre of Natchez in 1729. I believe they were instigated by the British against the French in this region, which European powers will want to do. They oftentimes use the Indians as surrogates in their mainland grudges against one another. Of course, the different European powers have different philosophies, different ways of interacting with the Native Americans. The French did not settle in patterns like the British did when they settled North America. The French tended to view the Indians more as trading partners. So with a small group of Frenchmen and a friendly tribe, you could gain access to furs and materials from the interior, bring them to the trading post, and then for shipment to Europe, as the French did up in provinces north of the St. Lawrence River. They just tended to settle more in a manner of extracting wealth from the ground They lucked out at Jamestown eventually and figured out they could grow tobacco and make a profit off of that. They could be more land hungry than the French were. Of course, the Spanish settled in a different manner as well. It was the mission and presidio system. They would set out, found a church, send out a priest, and have a few soldiers there with them to protect the community. It's also, much like the French, they engaged in trading, but also as more overt religious goals, converting the local tribes to the population. You frequently see Roman Catholic priests at the French settlements as well. In fact, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History has a cross in its collection that was found at Fort St. Pierre up at Haynes Bluff. The priest there was killed by the Yazoo during that massacre down on the front of the hill. Also during those excavations they exhumed some Native Americans. Yes, sir?
It was a Recollect priest from down Quebec, not Roman Catholic.
Oh, okay. Very good. But they have those artifacts. There's an archaeological study. And, of course, why did they settle a place that became known as Haynes Bluff? The same reason that people settled at Vicksburg later on is that at Haynes Bluff there's also a bend of the river. And from those heights you can control access to the entire delta via water. In much the same way, if you control the heights at Vicksburg, you can control who comes up and down the river. You're setting up your own gate. Early explorers in this region, Hernando De Soto, 1541. Joliet and Marguette, 1673. La Salle, claims the entire region of France in 1682. And Louisville, probably one that's most important to us, because he left the most lasting mark on the region with New Orleans and settlements along the coast. Great rivalries, and also different interactions with the Native Americans. One thing that scholars try to explain is the differences between the Native American tribes in North America, Central America, and South America. Because in South America, Europeans were able to come in fairly quickly, subdue major civilizations, and take over, almost in the form of regime change. Whereas in the American South, the North American South, it was constant warfare. Every step of the way, from the time De Soto entered North America to the time he made it to the Mississippi River, he was just in combat one way or another. There was a difference in the structure and the development of the peoples. In Latin America, South America, you had established civilizations where they had a hierarchy, a prominent leader in charge of a large area. So you could go in, take out the leadership and put yourself at the top of the hierarchy, much like the Spanish did. They take out Montezuma and the Inca. Everybody else underneath continues to work, just for a different. Whereas in North America, it's still very much tribal, hunter-gatherer. So you may be traveling through Hinds County as a conquistador, and by the time you reach Yazoo, okay, you encountered a different group of people, and you've got to pacify them, bribe them, or use them until you get to 2 or 3 more counties over, and you encounter a completely different set of people, and you have to deal with them, fight them, or negotiate. That's that way all the way through the Southeast, and that is why the Spanish had a very difficult time establishing control over the Southeast. There was no large civilization where they could just come in, take over the top, and everybody else would follow in the line. So that's the primary difference between North and South America and the natives that they encountered. Of course, European rivalries are going to shake up in the 1600s and into the 1700s. And, let me get you a quick visual here of Mr. D'Arberville. Exploration. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 gave Britain all the land east of the Mississippi and Spain to the west. And as a result of the French and Indian War, 6 years' war in Europe, And of course, after the Revolution, the Treaty of Paris 1783 gave you United States land east of the Mississippi. There is going to be a dispute to eventually lead to the War of 1812, but legally, the lands belong to the United States east of the Mississippi. And of course, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 is going to show a large part of what we would see as modern continental United States. Locally, the Natchez Treaty of 1790 with the Choctaws ceded the site to Spanish for defensive fortification. Of course, a place that we call Fort Hill changed hands again in 1798. An image here for you. Now, this will be a good one to keep in your folios, because as you progress as a tour guide, you'll find yourself burdened down with bigger and bigger notebooks, or maybe you convert over to electronics, but it's not uncommon for tour guides to come in with a big 3-inch binder, like a pack mule, one under each arm, with information to be prepared for whatever questions that visitors may have, or whatever interests. Sometimes you don't know. They showed up at a Civil War site. They may not necessarily just want to hear about whose monument is where on the tour road. They want some of this backstory. They want to know why they're very interested in the history of this region, not just what happened for 47 days. This is a plan of Fort Nogales, Walnut Hills. That is Fort Hill, the northern end of the park. Major Confederate fortification during the siege, and after the siege is a major USCT fortification. In fact, when you travel along the northern portion of the Confederate line from Fort Hill over to just before you get to Tennessee Circle, you're actually traveling on fortifications built and occupied by United States colored troops. But due to the nature of the creation of this park, where it's by congressional mandate, only is supposed to interpret a certain period of time. What happened before or what happened after is out of the mandate. And because the budgets are sometimes, it's hard to interpret everything you want to do, let alone what you need to do. So they interpreted what was mandated by Congress at the time. Of course, in recent years, our mandate has changed. We're able to interpret slavery, what went on after the siege, occupation, and Reconstruction. So that puts a whole new world up for us to talk about. If you want to talk about the importance of Fort Hill, say, no, the Confederates were not the first one to have the idea to fortify this hill. No, the United States was not the first folks to have the idea to put a fort on this hill. The Spanish had done it earlier. And again, for the same reason, the French established that little post up at Haynes Bluff, right there from that hill, to this bend of the river. Come around that curve, they're swept right up against the banks. If you've got a battery of artillery down there, you can close it off and fishing off the water hose in the summertime. And that is why Vicksburg was reported strategically in the era before steam. 1798, Congress created the Mississippi Territory, which was significantly bigger at the time, extended all the way to Alabama. During this era, there was also a major scandal in United States history called the Yazoo land fraud. We were famous before we were for a state, we were famous for corruption before we were a state. So, one of the same things that we've seen in the news the last 10 years were occurring to over 200 years ago, where folks said, we can sell you prime waterfront property out in the Yazoo Delta. It's better than Florida. If they'd known Florida existed at the time as a vacation place, they would have advertised the Yazoo Delta at it, and people were buying property, flipping it, and selling it to the folks that never laid eyes on it until they had a big real estate bubble. And given our history for the last 10 years, we all know what happens with economic and real estate bubbles. Whoever the last person's name is on the title gets stuck holding the bag. At that time, they didn't have federal deposit insurance or regulators. A lot of people lost their money. The government had to step in and deal with a lot of unhappy folks who were being ripped off. That's the nature of speculation in land throughout the United States history. As more land becomes available, you can first buy it cheap and then try to flip it. First Anglo settlers in the region. One of the most important to us is Elephant Trust, a guy named Vick. 1814, Methodist Reverend. In a place north of Vicksburg, known as Open Woods. You know where Open Woods Road is? Openwood subdivision? Right out in that area. Civil War map still lists that as Open Woods Road. An area out there. Because basically it was the area that had been cleared off and was an opening in the woods. They're creative with the names. I'm the same person that named the White House. Newitt Vick is also an entrepreneur who realized that he could make some good money selling property. He's a little more ethical about it than folks involved with the Yazoo land fraud and began laying out lots in the town. Of course, acquiring legal title from the Choctaws is always a good policy as far as settlers who are involved in speculating in land, because that gave them free title to the land and also opened up this land for new settlers. So you're going to have an influx into the region. So he's got something that people need. Waterfront property, not prone to flooding, overlooking a major transportation economic corridor. Of course, this is the Vick family plot down around the Open Woods subdivision. Next thing we're going to get into, I'm rushing through this a little bit because we've got just about 15 minutes to make it through the end of this. Next we're going to talk about the economy. We've got the land, we've got the original settlers. People tend not to move into places where they cannot make a living. Unless you're just a survivalist or just a misanthrope who doesn't like people at all, you're going to go where other people are and you can make a living. So there has to be economic opportunity. This little device right here is going to create a lot of economic opportunity in the United States South. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793. This is a very simple device. It's also Whitney's bane. It's a rotating barrel, a wheel, with cards on it to separate the seeds from cotton. I've never picked cotton, but I've had relatives that had, and they said it's quite painful on your fingers in the course of the day. Separating cotton from the seeds by hand is no fun, time-consuming, and tedious. But you can purchase labor cheap, and you have many people who do that. And the cotton gin is going to be the primary reason for the explosion of slavery in the American South. So the development of the economy in this region is the transportation revolution. We have another route that was in this region at the time, developed out of an old American path called Natchez Trace. What happens, people would build keel boats out of wood up in Kentucky, Ohio, up reaches of the Mississippi, Ohio River, float down Mississippi to Baton Rouge, New Orleans, sell everything aboard the boat, hogs, tobacco, whatever, and the boat itself for wood, folks building houses and construction, and then walk back home. It's difficult as heck sailing up the Mississippi River. Steam wasn't invented yet. So you walk, and you took the shortest path. So in order to catch those upper reaches of the river, you take a diagonal path from up around Natchez and up toward the Nashville area. You catch one of the river systems up there. So once you get into Tennessee River and those other rivers, there's one of the few rivers that actually flow from south to north. and catch them going a different direction. That's why when Grant begins his invasion of Tennessee, it worked so well for him. It's because the rivers are flowing from south to north. Why is that important? If you got the Navy with you, and you got your gunboat out there, it's transport, and it gets hit and disabled, it doesn't float south into the Confederates' arms. It floats back into territory you control. A young lady named Annabella Carroll discovered that phenomenon and brought it to the attention of folks in the War Department. And several years after the war, she successfully sued, and we got some compensation for noticing that anomaly on the southern map, helping influence the war. You can Google her online and learn a little bit about her. It's called the Transportation Revolution. We suddenly found a way to go further, faster. Unlike we are nowadays, but light speed compared to what they were doing back then, which was basically human speed or mule or horse speed. There's a little chart talking about the types of transportation and the expense involved in the lowering of its cost as a result of this revolution in transportation. It becomes cheaper. That's why when we go to different stores, we can buy stuff made overseas now much more readily than we used to could, because it's so much cheaper to transport it. Look at these big mega transport vessels flying the world's oceans. It costs pennies to ship stuff around the world. It wasn't always that easy. This is a chart showing the rates of travel back in the day. So right here in Vicksburg, it's right there. What about there? A little over 5 weeks from New York City. That is floating down the watershed or going down around this way by 7. Or if you're really tough, this way by foot or wagon. $18.30. Look what steam has done. It was cut it almost in half. A little area of Appalachia that takes a little longer to get to. New York, Mississippi, a little over 2 weeks. $1857, 5 weeks will put you out in Arizona. Whereas just 50 years earlier, you barely made it to Mississippi. Look at Vicksburg now. 5 days. So we went from a journey from 5 weeks to 5 days as a result of that transportation revolution and the development of infrastructure along the rivers. So we'll notice about the steamboats. Also, it's going to reflect in the politics of this region. There aren't many streets in these towns along the rivers have a clay street in the town. Is it because of clay? Or because of a politician named Henry Clay? Henry Clay, the great compromiser, the great pacificator, was also an advocate of what they call the American system. The American system called for the government to build roads and maintain the Mississippi River, open up the Mississippi River to transportation to help facilitate business interests. The Democratic Party at that time did not want to spend money. They were the party of fiscal miserliness back in the day. They didn't want to spend money at all. Whereas the Whig Party, which Henry Clay was a member of later, the government should spend money on federal roads and upgrading of rivers in order to help the economy. So if you live in a river town, yeah, that sounds really good. That's good for business. And that's why a lot of these towns along the Mississippi River up until the beginning of the war were Whig strongholds. This is good for the economy. And as a result, some of them are not going to be very keen on secession, because secession is also bad for business. 1820, you had 69 river boats. By 1850, you had 740. Kind of like airplanes from 1930 to 2014. The sky's just full of them at night. You can't watch the sky without seeing them. Railroads. First steam locomotive in the United States, 1829. There's people who claim to have railroads before. There were railroads before. You had steam engines, but they were roads on rails with a wagon pulled by a horse. And the rails were different also. Cases there was a wooden rail. Others there was a wooden square rail with a metal strap on top called strap rails and T-rails. And particularly in the South, at the beginning of the war and into the war, there was still not a lot of uniformity. If you travel across the state of Mississippi, there's a chance you'd have to get out and change cars at some point because the gauge is different. That's going to be a handicap in the South as they try to move troops in and around on these internal lines. Kind of negates their advantage. How does that affect Vicksburg? That bottom line there. 40,000 bales of cotton were transported to Vicksburg by rail in 1948 and 49. That is why Vicksburg is important economically. It's a shipping point from the interior. And the cotton economy was as such in the South that it changed the development of the South. The road networks in the North were established on a small farm system and an industrial system. In the South, roads were constructed for the primary reason of getting cotton and crops to areas where they can be transshipped to other parts of the country or to Europe. And that's also going to impact the importance of the Mississippi River at the beginning of the war. The Mississippi River was a major artery of transportation. And farmers in the interior of the United States, Old West, and Old West back then was Ohio, and then Cincinnati, it was called Porkopolis. They weren't shipping pork to New Orleans, they weren't shipping pork to St. Louis, they were shipping pork to Europe, Boston. Yes, sir.
David, I went to a program on Friday with Jim Woodrick and Parker Hills, and one of them, I don't know which one it was, it might have been you, Jim, I'm going to steal, but in 1860, a bale of cotton was worth $425. Put that in today's money with a 14% increase, or however the math was, it's over $6,000 a bale. I think.
And that is going to play a major role in the latter half of the war around here because you're going to have something of a gold rush atmosphere in 63, 64, and 65 as people try to profit off these expensive cotton bales to a cotton-starved North. You got relatives in the Army and you can smuggle a bale of cotton up to St. Louis, you were set after the war. So that's something the authorities are going to have to deal with on both sides in this region. In the corruption during Reconstruction, cotton becomes king. This is the first steam railroad in the United States. So there's big traditional steam engines that we imagine had come about quite a bit years before the Civil War. This is over in New England. Of course, next we get on to the subject of slavery. This is now taped for the movie 12 Years a Slave, partially filmed in New Orleans, based on the book by a guy named Solomon Northup, who was a free man living in the North, captured, sold into slavery down in New Orleans. It took him 12 years to gain his freedom. It's a true story. One of the guys that was involved in the trade that Northup mentioned in his book, and Theophilus Freeman, operated in Vicksburg and Natchez. There's some legal records where he was involved in a court case in Vicksburg. He was from New England. There's some numbers for you. Number doubles exponentially. You look at the records of Union soldiers, it tells where they were born at. If you're looking at African American soldiers enlisted in the Union Army in Pittsburgh, you find out where they were. The older guys, 30 and older, tend to be born up on the East Coast, North Carolina and Virginia. And the younger guys were born here. That is reflective of the economy. Even the Civil War in the 1840s and 50s, there's a glut on the market. There's too many enslaved people. For folks like Theophilus Freeman are buying them cheap and marching them across country down the Trace over to Natchez, where the Forks of the Road was the second largest slave market in the South next to New Orleans. Some of them had a profit in an area that's still developing, still clearing off land, to enrich themselves with human labor. 1860, there were only 37 free black people living in Vicksburg. And if you're up in Arkansas, there were hardly any. In fact, there was a great exodus from Arkansas at the beginning of the war because the legislature voted to re-enslave any free black people living within their borders. This is a map drawn up at the time showing areas of concentrations of slavery. And there, some of the most concentrated areas in the country are along the Mississippi River, along the delta here. See over around coastal Georgia, Charleston, and this area is called the Black Belt across the south, that most fertile area of ground. It's most conducive to cotton planting. And what makes all this possible, that extension of slavery here, goes back to the cotton gin. Up until the invention of the cotton gin, the only really profitable cotton was called long staple coastal cotton, Sea Island cotton. The fibers were long enough, it was relatively easily to manually separate the seeds from the fibers. But you can't grow Sea Island cotton in the interior. Short staple cotton is what they had to grow. And that was unprofitable until the gin was invented and able to separate that on a mass scale. So the cotton gin made slavery more profitable in the interior. And the simplicity of its design made it easy to copy. Little Whitney never could enforce his patent on it because everybody and their brother made copies of it. It was in wide-scale use in this region by 1800 and led to the development of it. Few facts: second largest city in Mississippi, free white population of 3,100, 1402. And that's just in the city limits. Close-up view of the Delta. Vicksburg didn't have its numbers in at the time this map was created, so they left it more or less blind. Warren County's population is 6896 plus 13, almost 2 to 1. And those kind of ratios led to a lot of fear. There's a good book written several years ago by Professor O.S. named Winthrop Jordan. The book was called Silence and Tumult at Second Creek. What happened is early during the war down in Natchez, carriage drivers were overheard plotting an uprising. The paranoia was such, the fear was such among planners in that area, they engaged in secret tribunals and a reign of terror. And in the first 2 years of the war, anywhere from 40 to 400 slaves were executed on an area along St. Catherine's Creek and outside of Natchez. County is the Queen, just above Vicksburg, is almost 93% slave. It's a crazy ratio. It's something that folks fear. And as these populations ratios become more and more skewed, more and more paranoia and fear is going to set in. And that's going to cause a tightening of the slave code. So what you see progressively through the 1800s is the tightening down on legal authorities, by legal authorities. The slave patrollers, there was an old slave narrative called them paddy rollers. Slave patrollers. But like today, laws on the books are not always easily enforced. In the 1830s and 40s and 90s, there's letters to the editor complaining about the woods were fairly alive at night, and folks visiting each other's plantations. They weren't talking about the planters. The slave population was such that people did a lot of roaming around at nights. Closure on Mount there. 92.5 Issaquena, 74 Yazoo, 77 Madison, 71 Hines, 88% Madison, 77, 9% enslaved in Tensas. In 1860, on the Civil War, 66% Warren County. 2/3 of Warren County's population enslaved men, women, and children. A lot of number crunching has been done out there by folks. You get on YouTube and others, you see people arguing back and forth over issues. But the thing that is important to know is whether you're involved in slavery in the South, or owned slaves or not opposed to it, it influenced you. Just as today, you cannot escape from fossil fuel usage as part of the economy. You can go live in a cabin in the woods or something, but somehow you're going to be dependent on fossil fuels as part of the economy. That's what, much the same way slavery influenced all of society in the South. I'll get you in just a second. Jute, grown in Kentucky, was used to cover cotton bales. Hemp, grown to cover cotton bales. Pork, grown in Tennessee, the mountainous areas, was used to feed slaves in the lower South. Shoes made in New England, used to put shoes on slaves in the South. Wood used to move the steamboats up and down the river was cut by slaves. Servants who attended to people on the riverboats were enslaved. Whether people owned slaves not approved of or not, it still was a part of their lives. It's something they were in contact on a daily basis. And most of those things that we don't even think about today. Yes, sir.
I know south of town, down in Warren County, a fair amount of Indian population.
Yeah.
Have an idea of totals of Indians?
No, because stealth was your best friend if you were Native American, because you were supposed to move west. So you'd have a lot of folks who would pass and try to disguise their identity so they wouldn't have to move west. Because by the treaty, they shouldn't have been here. And that is an obstacle. Folks have done genealogy. People who are Native American, Native descent would change their names and would try to change their identity and blend in with the population so that they wouldn't be discriminated against. As much as today, as people were very proud of their Native American ancestry, for a long time it wasn't that way, and people tended to hide it and disguise it. Yes, sir.
I had a tour a while back, and the guy told me that, and I'd heard this fact before, that 60% of the cotton produced in the United States, the number one export in the United States was 60% cotton exported out of the United States, and 40% of that 60% came from a 12-county area of Warren County. Now, I said that fact to somebody, and the guy told me, he said, yeah, that's right. He said, that's about right. He said, but what was the number one industry in the North? Textile mills.
Yeah, well, that's it.
They were getting, the North was relying on the slaves to produce the cotton so that they could, in essence.
And that's what's going to happen. That's what's called the second party system in the United States. That's going to break down in the 1850s with Stephen Douglas's idea about bringing the Transcontinental Railroad to the Kansas-Nebraska territory. All the agreements that they had worked out up to that point had to be addressed and changed, and also to bring in Texas into the Union. Okay.
The figure that you were probably referring to was in 1860, 60% of the gross domestic product, the GDP of the United States, was directly dependent upon cotton. The agricultural production of it in the South, the textile mills in the north, the insurance industry of insuring the shipments to Europe, the shipping industry itself, and the financing is, of course, like all farms, you would borrow the money in the spring to plant and then pay your loan off come harvest time. But 60% of the 1860, 60% of the GDP of the entire United States is cotton.
And those people in the north that were involved economically were called cotton Whigs. The Whig Party believed in that internal government spending money on transportation. You had shippers and insurers up in the Northeast who were making a profit off of slavery in Mississippi and Louisiana. What's going to happen in the 1850s is much like a marriage where people disagree on something vehemently, and they just, we're just going to agree to disagree. We're not going to talk about this. This is too painful. Every time we talk about this, we argue, so we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. But with the war with Mexico, all that new territory acquired, they had to figure out what they were going to do as far as representation in Congress, the House, and the Senate. Because whoever controlled those states, whichever party controlled those states, would cast votes either for the extension of slavery or the blocking of slavery in those new territories. And it was a question of national importance, and it forced people to deal with something they didn't really want to deal with. And so in the 1850s, you're going to have a civil war start. Half of them bleed in Kansas. They're going to be fighting over the civil things the rest of the country was fighting about years earlier. It's going to break out. And these things that the North and South have tried to keep a lid on is going to burst out of control. And areas that are Democratic strongholds, sympathetic to the South, like areas of New York, be forced to do it. Have any other questions? No. When can we get out of here? That's well, I appreciate you coming out here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you in future classes, and hopefully I look forward to seeing you out here leading some tours very soon. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them to us. We got email and other things. And maybe later on we tell you some resources that you can tap into to do your own research to fill out that portfolio for your guests. Yes, ma'am.
What books do you recommend we get, or what was the name of that book that we're supposed to read?
There's a CD, right, Tim, with the...
one you handed out.
I didn't have one out. That one that has
There's a bibliography on
Yes.
on that CD.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. It's been great. Like my 18-year-olds, I didn't see anyone sleeping or texting.